Good morning, viewers, and welcome once again to the Economy and Politics Show, where we discuss developments around the economy as it has to also do with politics and policy. It's the first day of the 2020 Eid al-Kabir Muslim holiday, and I guess a lot of Nigerians at home. Of course, we still have the lockdown easing, courtesy the COVID-19 pandemic. And on this first day, Thursday, July 30th, 2020, we'll be looking at a very interesting topic: assessing consumer protection and advocacy in Nigeria. It's very important that across the world, nations that are seen as effective and efficient in terms of the political economy are nations that take seriously consumer protection. And Nigeria is on that pathway now with the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Council, which is chaired or has a CEO, Mr. Babatunde Irukera, a legal luminary and one that has been driving that advocacy. It's nice to have you on the program.
Good morning, thank you.
Yes, good morning. Prior to when it became the FCCPC, you had set out the Patient's Bill of Rights, which was designed to improve the situation of Nigerian patients, to improve their rights to fair treatment. And this period of the pandemic, we had reports and concerns around the fact that hospitals were turning back people who needed treatment, particularly that are outside the novel coronavirus. Just want to ask first if you had complaints like that and how the FCCPC approached that situation.
Well, thank you for inviting me first, and thank you for the question. Indeed, the Patient's Bill of Rights was the first project I embarked on when I took office in 2017. With respect to how patients are treated, the issue for us in the Patient's Bill of Rights is that when there's a medical emergency, there's a responsibility on healthcare providers to at least provide the minimal required stabilization, because it had become quite a problem that people who were potentially victims of criminal conduct were not treated. Now, how has that played out with the pandemic, COVID-19? It's a slight different situation. Remember that I carried out enforcement activity in one particular medical facility in Victoria Island, where the allegation was they were concealing COVID patients and not kind of doing some under the radar therapy, which was inconsistent with the public health situation. And so what we have seen more, what we've been more vigilant about is making sure that facilities are not treating patients in a manner that can compromise other patients who would come in for other things. But the point you are making is about people who have other medical conditions, but who are not received on account of potentially being infected with COVID. We haven't seen much of that, but I understand that that's a potential problem. The COVID situation is different. There's a requirement and actually a responsibility for even private medical facilities to inform the appropriate authorities when someone who's infected with COVID presents. And so I would not paint with a broad stroke and think that it's exactly the same thing as when they refuse to treat people on account of emergencies.
Yeah, so we'll take it that definitely it wasn't a huge issue, but if it comes to your table, it's taken on and the issues of advocacy comes to the fore.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's look at 2020. You rolled out the fact that it will be much about robust enforcement and wider consumer education. And we've seen so much happening this year, even amidst the pandemic. The FCCPC has been at the forefront from last year, where you handled issues around the aviation space, down to issues of concerns in the healthcare and several other issues. How has it been so far? And what has the pandemic, in terms of the lockdown and the need to also leverage digital, taught the FCCPC?
Well, many things. One of the things that for sure has been our experience is that, so the pandemic means people are at home and people are apprehensive, but it's also an opportunity for some businesses perhaps even many businesses. And wherever there's the human nature is almost opportunistic by default, and sometimes by extreme predatory. And so what we've seen is that people were being opportunistic about it, whether it's making false claims about what are potential effective therapies against the pandemic, or those who are gouging prices and increasing prices excessively of basic hygiene products and even other things. And so what we've done is to start out by issuing advisories to industry to let them know that certain conduct is a violation of law. And after we issued out the advisory, we engaged in some level of advocacy, and then we started enforcement. And because of our reduced capacity, because the federal government has many people at home, what we've had to do is to leverage technology a lot more. We're doing investigative meetings by Zoom and meeting trade associations by Zoom and doing everything we possibly can. More recently, we started prosecuting 4 key supermarket and pharmaceutical chains for excessively pricing protective equipment and basic hygiene materials such as sanitizers. And that's an important, prosecution is an important regulatory tool, because at a time when we can reach out to every place and everywhere, it's a consequence management system that can modify people's behavior. So when you prosecute, others will realize that they could end up in jail for inappropriate conduct.
Yeah, talk about prosecution. Several Nigerians are really thrilled at the fact that you are at the forefront of it, benefit of the fact that you're a lawyer. So tell us how you balance that, plus the role of coordinating the activities of FCCPC.
So I mean, what I have found, and that's probably the case with many other agencies, is that there's a significant amount of administration involved in being the chief executive. And quite frankly, if you focus almost exclusively on that, it can take all your time. But what I remind myself all the time is that this is an agency that wasn't created to provide jobs. It wasn't created, it has a mandate. And I believe I came on the job based on that mandate. And that's an agency that also has limited resources. Industry, the top companies in industry can afford any type of lawyer. They can afford any amount of money. But I'll tell you, for instance, my 2019 budget for legal fees was about 2 million naira. I can't even afford, I mean, if I were a private lawyer, I couldn't even afford myself. And so it became important that to get the best possible representation, we had to put ourselves out there. And I'm a lawyer. I mean, I've been a prosecutor, and I've been a defense counsel. I've been a regulatory lawyer. I don't see any reason why. I mean, and the law clearly states so anyway. The provisions of the FCCPA allows lawyers who work in the institution to represent. And I think that it has been very helpful. On the flip side of that is that it has also been a very strong message to industry. It allows them to know exactly how serious we are about the law. And I have picked on cases that we think is very important to use to send a message to industry, to let them know how seriously we focus on those issues. And sometimes I've been accused, some people have said maybe it's a vendetta and all of that, and I say that doesn't even make any sense. I prosecute every case that I think is important.
We've really seen that, especially your engagement and calling to order pharmaceuticals, even recently the stranded passengers in an airline firm. We saw how you responded to that. Beyond the pharmaceutical, a case of even a hospital that, due to not handling the situation very well, you took up that case and ensured that justice came to the fore. So those are very interesting measures we're seeing in terms of you being at the forefront of prosecution, benefits of being a lawyer in that. But talk about consumer education. How is it deepening? I know that you've reached out to the media working, I mean, in terms of partnering to enhance consumer education. And how has that approach been in terms of assessing it so far? This is the month of July 2020.
So my sense of education was that it was never going to be effective. I mean, there's just no way the regulator can truly provide all that information to consumers and educate them sufficiently. Prior to when I took on the role, it was a line item in the budget to print flyers and have a TV program. And so how many flyers are you going to print in how many languages? So even if you print 4 million flyers, that's a significant amount of money. I mean, you're talking, how do you get 4 million? I mean, what real impact would those 4 million flyers make in the scheme of things? And what I also discovered is that one of the things that they had a high level of inventory in the store when I took on the role were flyers that had not been distributed. So first, you can't afford to print all the flyers you need. Second, no matter how many flyers you print, it's not going to be that effective. Third, you don't even have the channels to push those flyers out that quickly. And so it was very clear that that's not a working approach. So I came up with two approaches to consumer education, very robust consumer education. While we'll continue to do the general basic ones, the flyer, the jingles, but I decided we'll use social media a lot more, which we have. And one of the things is that the commission is very active on all its social media handles and try to be responsive on that. The second thing that I decided we would do is enforcement. There's nothing that tells people their rights more than seeing consequences for people who have done something. So if they know that there was a consequence for behaving in a certain manner, when people behave in that manner to them, they know where to go. But the final thing is that we created a new complaint resolution mechanism system, a technology, and now we're getting companies to plug into that. So that as complaints come to us, we will push it out almost immediately on a dashboard to the companies, and we would have it on our dashboard. We'll be able to monitor how quickly companies are resolving the complaints. We're looking to write regulations around that shortly. I believe that the companies are the best people to educate consumers about their rights. They've done the research, they've done everything on how to advertise their products. They know how to get every product and their advertisement into every nook and cranny of the country. So there's no vehicle that compares to that. And so we would enforce the fact that they must use that vehicle to also provide basic consumer education about how to enforce their rights and where to go when they're dissatisfied. I think that by the time we do all of that, we would have done far better in our consumer education.
Yeah, because that even reminds me of the approach you took, particularly when it had to do with the banks, customer relations, and you emphasized the need that the banks have to come out clear and explain all the whole charges for them. And of course, we saw your advocacy in that level. So we understand how important it is for the stakeholders, the companies, to also take that step to ensure that they are accountable to the customers and the consumers. Now, let's look at one very critical area. I mean, Professor James Robinson, when he talked about why nations fail, said part of it is institutions. And he cited an example of the US where its antitrust laws are very robust, its regulatory environment. So there was the case of Bill Gates, multi-billionaire, who at the point faced that antitrust law because of that robust institution framework and regulation, which meant that no matter how powerful Microsoft was as a company, they must face the law where necessary. And of course, your role now in terms of the Federal Competitive and Consumer Protection Commission ensures that there is fair competition, there's a fair business environment for everyone, from the small businesses to the large corporations. In terms of the impact of strengthening the regulatory environment and ensuring that the antitrust laws work effectively and there's a fair business environment, how has it been so far in 2020?
That's interesting. You know, prior to 2019, we didn't have a broad, comprehensive, focused competition regulation in Nigeria. And yes. So I would say it's been about a year and a half now, because we were signed into law in January 2019, and that was a campaign season. Yeah. And so as we tried to take off and manage the process, now we got into this year and COVID has locked everyone down. But the one thing that's very clear is that industry and consumers are catching up with the fact that there's a new regime. The United Nations and other regulators across the world incidentally have remarked at how robust they think our framework has become in such a short period of time. But the focus that we have is also people who have done business the best way they know how to for several decades in Nigeria. And this is the largest economy on the continent and one of the largest markets in the world, as it were. And so many of these things have crystallized the way that is a potential violation of law. And so you're not, the right business regulator doesn't come in and freeze things up or begin to affect the environment in a manner that it erodes confidence. or stability. And so the approach we've taken is to look at what are the key issues, what are the key industries, and let's address that. We've built capacity very quickly in mergers and acquisition, so that at least we can make sure that going forward, companies that are combining are such that they do not materially distort competition. And so we'll stop the bleeding going forward. And then now we're looking back inwards to say, let's look at how each of these markets are operating. We're doing a bunch of market studies to understand the markets. And the next big item that we've moved on to now is restrictive agreements and restrictive covenants, meaning clauses, agreements, or clauses in agreements that are restraints to trade or restraints to competition. For instance, there's certain exclusivity clauses in some agreements that prevent others from getting into a space. And so what we're now looking to do is we're reviewing all of that and declaring such covenants or agreements illegal, so that opens up the space. The whole approach, like I said, is that once we stop the bleeding, we now want to remove the entry barriers. The entry barriers are basically these mutual understandings that companies get into that can prevent others from coming in. And once we've done that, we would also look at those who are catalyzing. Once we've done that, then the market would operate better. And we will now be able to see if there are single players or specific players in the market, who the nature of their operations is such that the market can never operate fairly. It is only at that time that you can begin to consider what kind of action you would take against those ones. But I think proceeding methodically by removing the restraint and allowing the market to correct itself as best as it can is the best regulatory approach. If the market doesn't correct itself, then you can intervene.
Well, definitely, because part of the acts, the new acts of 2019 had the provision of tackling monopolies. That's, so emerging markets, frontier markets, part of the characterization of the challenges has been monopolies taking on the market. And of course, with the FCCPC, a lot will be expected in that regard to continue the surveillance and ensure that that doesn't happen in the markets. And we'll be monitoring that and expecting that your office will carry that role effectively.
Certainly, certainly.
In terms of strengthening the regulatory environment, there is need to track so far your successes and challenges as a commission. So prior from when you became the FCCPC, and we already had a board on ground to support the activities, which is very important. Fortunate for you, because some of the regulatory agencies didn't have full boards on ground. How would you track the issues of response to complaints and resolutions? Because that's part of what builds up confidence in regulatory bodies like yours. Between 2017, when you took over till now, how has it been in terms of tracking and looking at the successes of resolving complaints, bringing the enforcement where required, and ensuring that every consumer knows that, yes, if they go to FCCPC, this matter can be resolved amicably?
Thank you. That's a very important question. So let me start out by saying that I don't think we're ever going to get a passing grade with respect to resolving complaints. Matter of fact, I had a meeting with the whole team yesterday, including our technology partner, and it was literally a riot act that we're still not doing well with complaint resolution. Sometime last week, someone made a Facebook post about discovering that we had an app, and he downloaded the app, complained through the app, and a long-standing tricky issue that had not been resolved with an appliance provider for over a year was resolved, and that went viral and everybody. When I took on the role, the CPC at the time was receiving approximately 700 to 900 complaints every year. Now I receive up to 700 complaints, up to 900 complaints in a week. Some weeks I receive 1,700 complaints. And so there's really no way. Right now I have 9,000 complaints open and pending that have not been resolved, in spite of all that have been resolved. I have over 1,000 complaints that have not even been assigned. My complaint resolution team is a team of approximately 18 people. Now the entire staff strength of the place is 200 and something. So you can see that we've dedicated a significant amount of our human resource to complaint resolution. Don't forget that you've got legal, you've got enforcement, you've got investigations, you've got quality assurance, admin, finance, and all of the people there, including drivers and everyone, were 247. And of that 247, I mean, close to 20% of it is in complaint resolution, which is not even a department, a unit. And so it's clear to me that our approach to resolving complaints is the wrong approach. The reality of it is that it's the companies that should fix this problem. But the system has been so lax that companies don't care to fix the problem. It's easier, I mean, it is easier for consumers to reach me than it is to reach companies. Not even multinationals who, if you just got on a plane, got off the plane on the other side of the Atlantic, have very robust complaint resolution mechanisms. Yeah. There's a toll-free line that you can call. Consumers know that line just by buying the product. They call, someone else picks the phone at the end of the line. Those same companies don't have those apparatus here in Nigeria. Recently, I met with a number of multinationals and asked them, I'm looking at your products. Which of you has a standalone complaint resolution system? There was only one that had on its product a number or place to call if you have a problem with the product. And that number is in the UK, and the email address is in the UK. And so it's clear to me that we must move to a point where we are just a secondary level complaint resolution authority. The social and the commercial pact between the consumer and the business. And that's why we're plugging them into our complaint resolution system and pushing the complaints out to them so that we can monitor and see that they're resolving it. It's almost as if they've outsourced. Sometimes I feel that the FCCPC is just a multi-company customer service desk with a number of, so if you buy a can of carbonated soft drink, 150 naira, and it's a short fill, you're not happy, you don't know where to go, you come to me at the FCCPC. I'm going to write a letter to whoever the butler is. If I write that letter from Abuja, to deliver it in Lagos is 3,000 naira because you bought a can of a carbonated soft drink. And so they get the letter, they don't want my trouble, they call you up immediately, say, oh, no, we're sorry. And you say, okay, we'll give you 6 cans. And you go, okay, that's fine. But I've allocated the resource to that. I have an open file. Someone is keeping that thing as open. It's an appraisal issue. It's a KPI issue for me. Because you guys have even resolved among yourselves, I don't even know. The greatest complaint right now on social media is, I tagged FCCPC, I didn't hear anything. And so you're complaining to your bank and you tag me, meaning FYI. And when the thing is not resolved, your complaint is that I haven't done it. If I respond to every tag and tag personally, I'm not even talking about the institution's handle, I am personally tagged on dissatisfaction over 1,000 times a day. Isn't it a waste of resource for me to chase that, not knowing whether somebody else is chasing and fixing it? So we must move to a point where the companies recognize that their responsibility in complaint resolution is not to me, it is to their customers. And so that's an area we're working on. And until we get that right, we will keep receiving more complaints. Even if I started a place and employed 2,000 people, what it means is that we simply receive more complaints and that 2,000 will still be inadequate. There are 200 million people in this country.
So I know that you've engaged most of the stakeholders, even down to professional bodies, you've engaged multinationals, you've engaged even the bakers recently. That was nice, bakers and caterers. You've engaged most of the critical sectors down to manufacturers. What's the response from them? Are we now seeing that commitment to supporting with the first level resolution?
The environment is changing dramatically. It's changing, but because if you're too far beneath the ground, you will dig a long time before you sprout. But the needle has moved significantly. It's just that because of where we're coming from, it still seems like a drop in the bucket. Businesses now do not want regulatory trouble. And if there's a regulatory problem that you can win, it's one where your customers say that they're dissatisfied with what you're doing. How do you win? So I would say that I'm getting a lot of cooperation. And in the few places where there's still some level of resistance, that's okay. The law takes its course. For instance, I was at a meeting recently where industry said to me, can you just develop some guidelines on how we should approach your investigations once you open an investigation? We want to be clear on how we approach it. And I said, why? And they said, well, we're following a prosecution that you're doing of a cosmetic surgeon. You're not even prosecuting her for the failed surgical procedures. You're prosecuting her for failing to cooperate with an investigative process. We certainly don't want to end up as defendants. And so that the balance between engagement and appetite, or at least determination or to enforce the law, including in court, is certainly providing the two sides of what you need for an environment to be more compliant. I think we're beginning to see people complying a lot more than even when I started out on the job.
Yeah. Now, when we look at what you said, it also looks at the need to deepen collaboration with the
Hello?
bodies that also have impact in their regulatory process of policies on consumers, even the Central Bank of Nigeria.
Oh, yes. And I don't think there's any way to succeed in this role unless you're partnering with other regulators who understand their sectors a lot more. And so we're constantly engaging and partnering with the Central Bank for Financial Institutions, the NERC for the electricity industry, the NCAA for aviation. As a matter of fact, we're supposed to have an important meeting with the NCC today on addressing speed of broadband and transparent billing for that today. But because of a public holiday, that is not happening. So not only are we partnering with other regulators, even the professional associations, like you said, the Bakers Association, the Quantity Surveyors Association, the NMA, so it's so important because at the end of the day, industries or sectors are such that they have a rallying point professionally, and pushing your values and your standards and your and aspirations for proper treatment of people is better done in partnership with the sector regulators and the professional and trade associations.
Mr. Irukera, I guess you must have a very thick skin, because one of the fora you had in the electricity sector, which my colleague attended, she raised concerns that it was really, really a rowdy session. How do you manage those sessions? I mean, you must have tremendous negotiation skills to ensure that all parties, even though tempers are flared, it doesn't go into fisticuffs. Have you faced more situations like that, and particularly for your staff when they go for enforcement, their security, which is very important too? How is that managed?
Oh yeah, we meet with resistance periodically, probably even routinely. And for me, one of the things that I'm very clear about in my mind is that there is, I mean, if the core of our work is to ensure that people are treated properly, we must also carry out our role by not mistreating people, even if they're targets of investigation. And so I go on the enforcement things myself. I've hardly ever needed police. I've never gone onto a premises and locked the place down, no. And each of the places where I've needed to lock the place up, I just say, well, we're going to close this place now, and it gets closed. And so I think the manner of engaging people is also very important. Force, if all you have is force, people will just feel victimized. And so what we do is we engage. We're not intrusive. We come into a business if we need to be there, and we allow you to carry on your business while we do our work. If our work is such that your business should not carry on, we allow you to close it down in a methodical fashion. Because one of the things we also need to do in doing our work is not to damage brands. I mean, protecting the image of brands is by far one of the most important rules we have as consumer protection, because people like those brands. People like those brands. We must preserve the integrity of the brands for the people to continue to have access to it. Now, when something goes wrong, we will certainly deal strongly with that brand, but not by necessarily grandstanding in a way that damages it beyond what the appropriate remedies should be. And with customers and consumers, once it's really a trust issue. Each of the time I've gone to the electricity fora, it gets very contentious, very rowdy. But once consumers know that you know exactly what the issues are, and that you're standing with them on how those issues are resolved, yeah, they would at least breathe. And when the operators also know that you're not on their side, you're for the consumers, but you're reasonable and you understand how business operates, then they also have some element of trust that even though you belong on the other side, you could potentially be an honest broker. And I've seen that quite a bit. And we enjoy that privilege and trust. Now, with respect to those who would disparage us, ourselves, including me, I mean, it comes to the territory. It comes to the territory. I get called all kinds of names and all of that. But since when did that mean anything? I mean, the people that have been, the people who have criticized me the very most and have said the most hurtful things to me are the people who I'm paid to protect far more. The consumers abuse me far more than the people that I target for investigations.
To the competition, business competition, and even improving consumer protection and advocacy in Nigeria. Now we're beginning to see things happen. I mean, since inception or since independence of Nigeria, we can say that this has been one of the best times for consumer protection and advocacy activities.
Well, thank you very much. The one thing that I think is important is that citizens need to take ownership. My experience in government, especially in consumer protection, is that citizens have become despondent. I don't know if it's several years of military rule or not, but it just seems like all we want to be are victims and hold someone else, especially the government, accountable for everything that goes wrong. Whereas if you think about something in commerce, a company has treated you poorly, and you'd rather go and lick those wounds and say, if only we had a decent government, nobody would treat me like this. No, people would do whatever they can to get away. And the strongest component of an enforcement framework in consumer protection is consumers who demand their rights, and when they're not given, they insist on it. Half the cases that come to me could be resolved if you have a consumer who says, I'm not going to let you go. I'm going to deal with you. I insist that you treat me well. The sheer number of people who tell me that all they need to do is say that, look, I'm going to report you to FCCPC, and the people behave immediately. And so we have to take ownership. And if we take ownership and then we call the regulators out, whether it's us or other sector regulators, call us out. The two things that leave is we must take ownership and we must strengthen the accountability system.
Thank you very much. That's the best way to wrap it up. Take citizen ownership and strengthen accountability. Thank you very much, Mr. Babatunde Irukera, CEO of the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, for transforming so far what we're seeing in consumer protection advocacy in Nigeria. And also special greetings to the chairman, vice chairman of the board. And we hope that you continue to drive consumer protection and advocacy in the country and create that fair business regulatory environment for small and large businesses, so that we in the country can trust that, yes, FCCPC stands out as a regulator that consumers can trust. Thank you once again for the time, and hope to have you subsequently in our show.
Thank you very much, and good morning again.
Yeah. Thank
this
you.
edition of the Economy and Politics Show, you've heard it there that it is important for citizens to take ownership, and also for institutions and corporations to be accountable. Till we come your way again tomorrow, where we'll continue this conversation on economy and politics, just note that you need to stay safe and continue to abide by the protocols in this period of the COVID-19 pandemic. Join us by 10 a.m. for the market review, where we'll give you developments around the financial and capital market as it relates with the economy. To come your way again, thank you for watching. Have a nice time and stay safe.